I'm just what it is, the third thing.
Oh, I think it's Meg is leading a conversation with boards and commissions.
Boards and commissions. Do you know what?
So
Yeah.
you'll see something published about it soon.
Okay.
It's pretty comprehensive review.
All of them.
Which ones are charter, which ones are code, which ones are quasi judicial, like kind of an overview as we move into the process to reauthorize our commission.
Okay. Okay, but that's time because they're not talking about the public safety commission.
Yeah. Exactly. And they're,
Not to cut you all off.
nah, we're gonna.
No. Good morning, everyone. We'll call this meeting of the Community and Economic Development Committee of the Anchorage Assembly to order. My name is Assembly Member George Martinez. We'll begin with Assembly Member introductions.
Zach Johnson.
Scott Myers. Cameron Perez, here.
Christopher Constant.
Mark Fiddlefield.
And on teams, we have Member Volan.
Happy to be here.
Are there any other members online? Great. Today is Thursday, January 11th, and we're at the Permit Center. And we'll start off with the regular reports, and we have our acting municipal manager with us today.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Man of all hats and trades in the municipality. We have Lance with us, and so we'll just ask for the updates from the various departments under the purview.
So thank you, Mr. Chairman. My name is Lance Wilbur. I'm the Community Development Director. I think I'll start with Building Services. Greg Soulé, the acting director, is out this week, but a couple of things I want to report is Daniel King, who is our private development manager, has been working with the fire department and others on accessory dwelling units to figure out how we can just make sure that we don't run into any title issues. So we'll get a report from Mr. King on that. The other thing I'll report in Development Services is that as many assembly members may know, we have a significant number of vacant and abandoned and blighted properties in the municipality, and the assembly appropriated some ARPA funds a couple of years ago to start that demo process. We go through a contractor, and some of those buildings that we find out, we actually have to go in and do some testing and potential remediation before we tear them down. We have 12 or 13 on the list. We've begun doing that. We had some other information. Public information officer who had some information to share with that. And I think we're preparing a story to show the benefit of removing some of these properties. It's not only just making the properties available to redevelop. A lot of these properties are magnets for bad activities. They cause a lot of attention for the police department, fire departments, the health department. So anyway, we'll be looking to get rid of more of those. If somebody's interested in the list, we can certainly provide that too. And get you guys that. That's what I have for community.
That would be great, the list of those properties. Any members of it?
Yeah, on that topic, the list, there's a separate conversation going about doing a catalog of vacant and abandoned properties that's been talked about at this committee. Is there an update on the status of that?
I will get you an update, Mr. Constant, because we actually have our GIS folks have done a mapping of all of those things based on the information that we have. Anecdotally, we think that there are more than the numbers that Mr.
Right. And so what I would like to do is organize an effort to pull in some other resources. You take the list and then do a canvas and really make sure that this is accurate. We can get it. And I have some ideas for resources that might be available to accomplish that. And so I want to lift that up and make it a priority maybe before winter so that we can really start to target areas and lift up sections where there might be some units that can be rehab and put back on the market or get to the mulch.
Through the chair, Mr. Constant, is separate from the buildings that are on that list. A right of way and use enforcement. Some listed properties that are good. Folks are in there. They need some help cleaning them up. So we're going through that process. We can't just go and clean them up this week. Basically court order.
Right. And there might be a third column for the list, if you will, vacant, abandoned, and deteriorating, like
particular.
you know, that in that category of needs a different approach.
Okay.
But I think a comprehensive catalog of the status will help us target certain areas that have high opportunity for reinvestment and retrofitting and bringing back to life or demolition to create new opportunities for development. And so I want to lift that up as a get it reprioritized. And so, like I said, I do believe I have 2 or 3 labor forces that can participate in a Canvas effort. And so I want to lift that.
Thank you, Member Johnson. Just to note, Member Broughton has joined us. And, Member Johnson, have a question?
Yeah, question. So there's a ACDA led effort to establish a fund for demolition. It sounds like you're familiar with it. Are you guys coordinating with them to figure out how what you guys are trying to accomplish and their goals might align?
I could just pause for a moment. Can you speak up? One of the members online asked for you specifically to speak a little about it.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you.
Second, Mayor Justin, the answer is yes. As a matter of fact, Scott Campbell, who's in Development Services, has been working with Mike Robbins when they prepared the grant request.
Okay, good. Thanks.
Excellent. Member Broughton?
So I apologize for being late. I'm walking into the middle of this. I do think we need to focus on vacant and abandoned properties, but I also want to offer, I've had multiple conversations recently about how do we basically jumpstart development, right? And knowing that new development is so expensive, I keep thinking about the fact that, that we make it really difficult to reuse the older buildings. And it's because we make everybody go up to all current codes, you know, with no regard for whether it's an aesthetic or a preference or, you know, just what's the new standard versus what is the life safety issue. And I know those are 2 different pieces. So I just want to register that I think we should focus on that, but also vacant and abandoned properties to the extent they're in the worst condition, right? They need the most work. So I also just want to put on the table that if we want to see our buildings being reused, we also have to address kind of the broader barriers to doing that. And that's kind of one of the projects I want to keep working on. And our staff is looking at, we've called it code safe harbor. I don't know if that's the right term, but just that general idea of separating what you have to bring up to code for safety reasons versus, you know, things that just aren't standard anymore. And I know there's a lot of examples of that, and that's building code. There's probably also things in zoning code. We've already done a couple of them like that, removal of the 10% requirement. So anyway, that's just more general, but I want to offer that because that's not only going to help redevelop vacant and abandoned properties by not having to bring them all fully up to code, but it's also going to help every other, you know, aging 70s building in our town in theory. Somebody's trying to do minor renovations. So it's not an either or. I just want to put that on the table as another strategy to reuse our building stock, which is really, I think, the best bang for the buck right now.
Thank you, Member Broughton. Moving to the next topic area, Mr. Wilkie.
I think I'm gonna turn it over to Craig Lyon, the planning director, and I know some of his folks have been doing some work since our last committee meeting, so I'll have him give a report on that.
Right, thank you.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chair. Happy to be here today with you. As you can see, I've got a couple of the experts in the room on the planning department. We are working diligently on a number of topics, including helping to figure out, tweak the site access amendments that were done. We had a good meeting with Cook Inlet Housing yesterday to look at some of the projects that they were doing to make sure that they can proceed forward without some serious changes, and that we came to a pretty good agreement on that. So we're working through that. Should be getting that forward fairly soon. Long range planning has a lot of projects that they're doing, thanks to funding that the assembly added. So we are working through a number of things over there, including, I think Mr. Yell can go into detail on this, but we're working on the targeted language, but the targeted 10-year version of the comp plan. So otherwise, we're still working through the usual challenges of filling our positions. We have 1 of 4 planners in the UMass group, looking for 3 folks over there. We have a couple senior and associate planners in each both current and long range planning groups. We're endeavoring to fill those positions. My update, I don't know. Do you have any more specific questions about any of the topics we're working through?
Thank you. Any members? Thank you for the update. Thank you for the continued work on the site access and to just work through all of those cleanups that's going to continue to work. Appreciate that. Next.
Yeah, give a brief update in the public works departments for traffic, maintenance and operations and PM&E just real quick. In the traffic department, we have recently interviewed to fill the traffic calming pedestrian safety position. We had a position that was in there, had moved to Division 0. So we've got a candidate that we're working to negotiate soon. The other thing is, Mr. Coy is coordinating with the Department of Transportation for a grant to do more extensive not pedestrian counting, but on the roadway system, we have a program that measures basically the condition of the asphalt. So it's a grant program, so we're looking to do something like that. Mr. Coy and his crew are out painting while the weather is good. So if you guys are seeing that, and obviously the state's doing the same thing. So if you see a big truck in front of you that's flashing, it's paint on the ground, don't drive over it. It's not a good look on your rate. So encourage it. It can come off, but it's a little bit of work. In the maintenance and operations, I think Mr. Constant is reminding me very well and appropriately, we've been working on our street sweeping. Our mapping hadn't been as timely as the completion. So thought that something was done last week or last month, and we hadn't quite that. We are done with our first sweep now. By our stormwater permit that we have with the state of Alaska, we're required to sweep 3 times a year. First one is done. So I'll report. The other thing in maintenance and operations, while not maybe relevant to this community, they are managing the fleet. The first 10 Durangos for ABD are here. We are outfitting them right now. So it's maybe not relevant to the development community, but I know it's interesting in some of the numbers. And then in project management engineering, we have 3 big contracts that we're looking forward to get started for construction of 42nd Avenue, just off of here, north of Tudor, between Lake Otis and Piper. It's going to get started. That's a cooperative project with AWU. 36th Avenue repaving. It's going to start, I think, North Lights. So you guys are going to see those projects coming up. We are going to have a pretty significant closure again on Northern Lights Boulevard, just east of this. So if we got a storm or anything, we got to fix it during that area. We'll do our best to do it. But anyway, that's what's going on. A lot of other stuff going on in public works, but yeah, I think that we'll share some more at the Assembly's Transportation Committee next week. There's some more. I like public works.
Great. And just to say a note on the East Anchorage closure at Northern Light between Boniface and Beaver, essentially right there, Baxter. A good job with the signage and the timeliness. It was pretty aggressive and cleaned up pretty fast. Thank you for the notification. Member Constant.
Yeah, thank you. A couple of things. Yeah, thanks. I can officially state to my detractors that I was the last street swept this year, and I'm okay
I
with
won't
that.
say what's by design.
No, I'm okay with it. I'm totally okay with that. There's an old story about original Mayor Sullivan who demanded that the snow and street sweeping always swept him last, because then he knew when the job was done. And so with that, just put that out there. And then second, in the transition report, there was a conversation about how maintenance and operations, street sweeping and snow equipment is at the end of its useful life and we have a crisis coming. But I believe we invested pretty substantially in some new snow maintenance equipment during the pandemic. And so can you help me understand the condition of that? And we are in a crisis. If we are in a crisis, what are we doing to ensure we're not going to be in a crisis when the snow falls?
Now, let's see, we got
Yeah,
7 minutes.
big question.
I will say that the transition report is pretty accurate. Our snow removal equipment is aging, and it's everything from our graders to our blowers, to our sand, our dump trucks. Thanks to a grant from AMATS, we have 14 trackless snow removal pieces of equipment. We are just replacing those, and so that, I think there's 14 of them. I think 5 or 6 are replaced now. I think that's the program to replace those. We, in the April bond, we had $1 million for snow removal equipment. So we are buying some new blowers, we're buying some new graders. But basically the budget for fleet for the last more years, maybe 9, it's been about $2.3 million when we don't get any congressional designated spending for APD vehicles. If we don't get that extra bump of money, that $2.3 million buys graders, police cars, trucks for traffic. Won't buy a lot for $2.3 million. When you're not doing that, you're not replacing. And what that does is that actually costs us for more money in maintenance and repair. So the report that we characterize there is pretty true. Our APD fleet on average, and we're doing better on that than others, is about 65% depreciated. Our heavy equipment is about the same, if not worse, and our general government is probably 65% depreciated. So to that point, our new maintenance and operations director is going to plan working on not only the schedule desired completion, but as a matter of fact, we met Mr. Falsey yesterday to explain to him sort of an outline of the age of the equipment, mileage, the hours. We are on this conversation with him. I will give you 2 last pieces of information. A grader's basically service life is 10,000 hours. We have 30 graders. I don't think there's 10 that are, well, probably 10 of them that are under 30,000. At 30,000 hours, you basically replace everything from engine, transmission, everything. So we're working to get ahead of that. And it's important that that equipment works on time and properly for 2 reasons. One, provide the service. There's no downtime. So I think, I think Mr. Warfield, some of them spent a little time in this business, and he can appreciate the importance of the condition of the equipment in order to be dependent on the street. So we are working a plan to do all 3: heavy equipment, APD fleet, and general.
So I know, just in conclusion, that we've been briefed on police and fire and their fleet issues, and we haven't yet come to a solution with those. I think maybe it was pretty surprising to hear the status of the snow hauling fleet. And I think members would agree it's a pretty high priority to make sure we're prepared to use snow. Obviously also to have our police and fire able to respond. And I know we're gonna be shifting a little bit of the focus, some of the heavy equipment conversations will move over to the enterprise and utilities committee soon, but it's proper venue to begin this conversation. It's top of mind. Thank you.
Bro?
Yeah, I'll mention something now that I'd like to follow up later, just as an idea, maybe it's transportation thing. Well, first I'll say, we built a city we can't afford to maintain. So I'm gonna keep saying that it is true, and this is one great example of that, right? So, I mean, we built a physical place that we cannot afford to maintain. So that is a structural problem we have to work on. But I appreciate the comments about the fleet. I guess my question is, and again, I know we don't have time to get into it today. I also know we haul snow, and I know that's contractors, and I just know that's how we've been doing it a long time. I know that's not how every city deals with it. For example, Valdez does not haul snow. Of course, they built their city so spread out that they have everywhere to put snow, which has its own issues. But I just wonder, to the extent that we're basically paying a bunch of contractors to always move snow somewhere else every year, I understand why we need to do that. I wonder, could we do less of it over time? Could we have a situation where we're leaving more snow on site? And again, I know there's challenges with that because we're talking about roadways and so on. But to the extent that we are spending so much on those contracts, and that is the choke point, as I understand it, when it snows, could we explore a long-term policy to do less of that, which would free up some of that contract money to go to the employees and the equipment over time to maintain our city? And I just want to put that out there because I know it's a big question. And I know there's pros and cons to that approach, but I just wanted to throw that out there so we can continue thinking about it. Because that's a piece that we don't often talk about. There's just so many contractors. And again, we know that is the choke point. So
Thank you. And just to also flag, it'd probably be in the utilities and enterprise committee as well. But the staffing question across all of the units seems like it's also continuing to be a challenge. And with respect to the difference between staffing planners, there's still a pain point for the city, but there's a difference between the lack of staffing for the snow removal and those other services as well. So I just hope that that continues to be a prioritization for the administration. And I think we have some folks here who will introduce themselves after the regular. Thank you. The staffing question has to be a top priority as well. We'll move into real estate. We have a report, yes.
Okay, Tiffany Briggs, Real Estate Department. Couple updates. Our tax proposed property sale is next Thursday, the 18th. We have 10 properties on the list. I think maybe a couple will shake off by people coming in to pay off, but for the most part, we're gonna stick right around that number. I met with some folks from legal yesterday to talk about some proposed code changes to deal with the public purpose process and how we deal with excess funds that could be due to the previous owners from that court case that came down. So there'll be something coming to you all. I'm not sure their timeframe, but we did have been starting to talk about that. Fulton Hills, we did a amendment to the development agreement. We extended the performance period. Since there was some delay in the approval of the transfer, we felt it was appropriate that there was some extra time on their end. We updated the legals, since there is a new legal description from when the development agreement was originally executed. And then also we put in their language that incorporated the provisions of the ordinance that were required on the developers to make sure that was included as well.
Excellent. Thank you, Lance. Thank you, folks from the various departments for your regular reports. And just a reminder to colleagues, if there are any of those areas of interest, follow up with the departments directly themselves, and then also the committees where the complementary work will be done. So it's not your first and only bite at the apple. At this point, with the permission of my colleagues, I would love to just pause and offer a moment of introduction for members of the administration who showed up with us today. We invited the administration to send some folks to this committee and to begin to create that alignment as well. And so I saw them come in, and I would love to give them the opportunity to come a little closer. You're probably a little too far back to be heard. Today, our meeting is also hybrid with the teams. And so we have the Assembly's owl in the front. And so folks would love to see you, and come on and introduce yourselves if you would. Thank you.
Thank you, Member Martinez. Or Chair Martinez. Hi, everyone. I'm Graham Downey. I'm the Mayor's Special Assistant on Housing and Transportation. Previously, I was with the Alaska Public Interest Research Group working on economic justice. So many of these issues are close to my heart. I'm glad to be here. Thanks for having me.
Thank you for being here.
Chair Martinez and Assembly members, my name is Amanda Moser. I'm really grateful to be returning to the municipality of Anchorage. I love the city, I love local government, and all these things, and so I'm really excited to be back. I am joining the mayor's team as the External Affairs Director. Excited to work alongside y'all.
Excellent. Great. We can show any members, so this is a hot seat moment too. So.
Welcome. Formally and informally. But Graham, tell us your thoughts on this preliminarily. What's going to happen in the short run? Well, in the short run, my goal is to learn as much as possible about what's already moving and what's already happening. Because I mean, I think we're hearing these reports. There's a lot in motion. There's a lot of work that needs to get done. There's a lot of catch up that needs to happen. So I'm very much in a learning mode right now, and trying to figure out how we can better support staff to get work done. Move the municipality forward, I think, is a really important.
Great. Thank you all for meeting with us. Thank you for taking the time out of this. Hope that it is part of the regular attendance of the staff person. And then also just to give one moment of pause with respect to staff alignment and the Anchorage Assembly. I'm deeply appreciative, and I know my colleagues are, of the work that staff does to help us do the work of policymaking and to learn and to be able to have really reliable information. And oftentimes for many reasons, communication positioning, ideas, we can rub the wrong way and bump into each other. And sometimes it's just really about the lanes that we occupy and finding the bridge of understanding. And I've shared that with some folks that, you know, if you're, I think Member Brawley has said this, if you're a planner, you think like a planner. And if you're a diplomat, you may think like a diplomat. And so people come to these conversations differently. But it is my intent to hope to communicate this to the administration, that I hope that we will continue to improve the relationships, strengthening, as you described, the support for staff, so that we can be responsive as policymakers to provide the support that you all need to support the staff. We need to get them together. But in that, the transparency and communication with our collective units had gone through ebbs and flows over the last several years. Some of those flows were administrative changes and some of those were just life. I hope that we can continue aligned toward outcomes, progress, and to your point, there's work in the flow that's really good, meaningful work that complementarily we can just build on, and hope that that's the continued alignment. And then I just want to thank you all for being here.
Thank you.
Enjoy the rest of the show. We have a lot of good discussions today. Excellent.
Thanks.
Cool, great. We don't have any unfinished business. We're going to move to new business. And this is very quick. For me, my part, I'll open up with item A, which is city data modeling investing discussion. And so I didn't want to provide any necessarily materials yet, but I wanted to open up a conversation and just to expose this conversation that I've been having and to see where there was any interest or not. But I wanted to keep it pretty brief. Essentially, a lot of the questions that we have are really about or are driven from data. And remember, Constant described earlier, for example, the data with respect to vacant and abandoned properties, giving us visual tools and data to be able to see and understand, and then make policy decisions about targeting support and et cetera. And one of the conversations that we've also had in this room, in this committee, members have brought the idea that who pays for what in Anchorage with respect to core services, with respect to expansion, with respect to infrastructure. Where are the demands? Where are the value per acre analysis sort of questions? And so I had a preliminary discussion with the group that was highlighted by Strong Towns. And so as that's one of our champion organizations that we look to for some best practices, this group coming out of Minnesota, Minneapolis specifically, called Urban 3, which does some really interesting graphic analysis of value per acre, but they do some really great visualizations of them. And I would make available, I have a presentation from them that I've received. I didn't want to open it up yet because it's much more of a small conversation. But I'm interested in, do we have analysis like the generic term of a value per acre analysis of Anchorage? Or are those, do we have the tools or the know-how internally to reproduce similar reports for ourselves so that at a glance, we can see where the strongest investments need to be made because of the value per acre with respect to the infrastructure and et cetera. So the point would be, the further out from the core you go, the more expensive it would be to build. But where are those cores? Who pays for what? There are many questions. It's pretty complex, but a value per acre analysis. Does anyone from our staff have a clue of what that is? From our vantage point, do we have any documents that demonstrate that? We've heard anecdotally things like pays for what? Love to have data that helps us understand that a little bit.
Is one start.
Anybody want to jump in on?
I will start. I have seen this graph in places.
Okay.
It's not a new thing. I check with GIS folks, also probably want to check with that. got some simulation. So let me get back to you. I can visualize what you're seeking. Know that, you know, it's gonna take a little bit of work, but I know what you're looking for. And I think, you know, the value per acre, it depends on what the value is that you're looking. If it's just economic, business, or, you know, income generated, or the value of the property itself, that's gonna be per acre. So we'll need to sort of refine exactly what you're looking for. Who pays for what? That's actually a little bit simple. So, because it's by service area, and inside those service areas, there's basically residential and commercial. You can divide it simply that way, and then kind of.
Great, yes, Member Constant.
Yeah, the last formal analysis of this question that I remember since in 2018. So there's a beautiful graphic that was on one of the draft. It's really clear in Anchorage where the who pays is at. What's not so clear is the other side of the equation, the cost associated with the growth and investment, which maybe gets to some of what Anna continues to talk about, which is the issue of overbuilding, or, you know, how the expense does increase in certain parts of town relative to infrastructure and other previous investments. And which I think gets to the argument of where are the savviest investments, the most bang for the buck to achieve outcomes, in housing, in neighborhood revitalization, and all those things. And so, but I do know that there's a previous analysis done in 2018 or 2019. The graphic is quite stunning on the who pays. And it's definitely downtown because it's units per acre that are taxed. That really drives that. The folks in South Anchorage like to say, we have the highest tax rate. But actually, when you compound the number of people who are paying, it shifts very rapidly to the downtown. And so.
And to more dense area.
Exactly. And then it spreads out into the more dense areas lower. It's not a pyramid. It's like a great spike. It looks like New York City skyline, you know, where there are some parts that are down here. It's vastly tall.
Yes. No, and thank you for that follow-up. And yeah, you're tracking the areas. And one of the interesting things, and I saw Member Brawley will be on the next, is you mentioned, you know, like what value do we want to explore? I think that's a policy question that good data can help us have a better understanding of, for sure. So I appreciate that. Member Brawley and then Member Assault.
Yeah, the thing, I was just trying to look for it. The thing that came to mind is the downtown plan. So the first question is, who has that underlying data, and do we just update it for 2024? Because I know what we're talking about, and it really is like a big red spike in downtown, and that is the highest land value by far. And that's pretty typical for cities. Like the center of the city is the most expensive place to build, because in theory, that's where you want all of your high-end economic activity. But it does, it goes up and down. So I would say we should start there. And it was I remember it being in our retreat stuff from last year. So, I mean, we had many, many things about housing, but there was the planning department's white paper, I think, included that. So that would be a place to start.
Okay.
The other thing is, when I was at the APA conference, I saw a presentation on fiscal impact analysis, and it's something that's required in California because basically their property tax structure is that if you build something new, that is carrying all of its costs. Because property taxes for folks, at least residential, are frozen at a certain amount. And so there's these laws in California, and I'm not arguing we should have these, but they have to basically prove that whatever they build is a net generation, which is an interesting thing. So I asked the guy afterwards, is there any analysis of existing residential uses versus, that one where it's looking at a new use or a hypothetical use? And he said the city of Redwood, California, they did that, firm did an analysis. I haven't looked at it yet. It's in my email for 3 months. But that is another interesting, because basically the methodology of that is looking at which land uses generate more income and which ones, revenue for the city, and which ones are net losses, right? And I think there's a lot of assumptions about which are the highest and best use for housing types or commercial or whatever, but some of those things are very outdated. Or, they were developed, a decade ago or a generation ago. And so anyway, so there's that resource too, to look at kind of that methodology of fiscal impact analysis with what we already have and not just a hypothetical development. So So I can dig those back
That's
out.
great. Thank you, Member Ball. Member Saul?
I was gonna ask, it'd be good to have maybe a presentation on where the tax comes from. I know Ms. Lechner put together a presentation that shows that dollar-wise, Hillside pays a high share of the city's revenue. But I think it's also maybe a lower percentage. So just how you slice that pie, it'd be good for us to understand, not that it's right or wrong, but a common knowledge.
Who would, just to follow, who would produce that report? So that the administration can hear. Was that?
The planning department did the previous one.
Yeah.
So, but it's also probably the CFO. Yeah.
Cool.
And someone shared with me the graphics, so I can definitely.
That'd be great
share. It's
for us to see.
2019.
That'd be great for us to see, and those are really good points. Member Brawley mentioned something that is also an interest of mine with respect to an at-a-glance understanding of where things are, the idea of the net positive. Because there's something really interesting about that, that I don't know that we have full understanding of with respect to policymaking. Like new things sound great. But complementary conversations that we are having even today about infrastructure and expansion, there's a suite of all of this when you add it up together somehow will give us some determination of do these things overall have a negative impact in the long run on our community based on some of the other challenges and the cost to do certain things, and where the biggest draw burdens exist with respect to the investments we want to make. Because some of them probably making some bad choices. If we don't know really how to make better choices. That's not to say that all the choices that we're making, better data will help us make better choices.
Mr. Martinez.
Yes, sir.
Chair, I have to leave. I'm hoping we can briefly pivot to number C on your agenda, so we can talk briefly about that. If you want to introduce, and then just.
Cool. So a member of Constant asked us to just bump up C, and we'll move it above B, and if there's no objections to that, we'll do that. Member of Constant and I had, we've been having these conversations about district plans, and today we have an actual document from planning with the list of adopted elements of the MOA's comprehensive plans and all of these various things. Member Constant, would you like to introduce this?
Yes, please. So, thankfully, the department has put forward this little attachment that has the various adopted elements that are neighborhood specific or more specific sub areas within the comprehensive plan. After a conversation we had a couple weeks ago in a assembly meeting, everybody left and George and I stayed for a very long time until after midnight, when everyone left at 10:45, talking about all of these things. And it became clear that there are a number of these plans, and there are plans that are important to members and members of constituencies. And so what I'm hoping happens starting today, and I have to leave, which is why I'm bumping now, is that I'm hoping that members who have within their districts plans that they have knowledge of and are interested in promoting elements of, will have an opportunity in this committee over the next several months to identify specific sub-area plans that they want to bring forward for discussion, with the intent that specific elements within these sub-area plans that are identified as priorities by the members, by the communities, and maybe by the committee, are then prioritized into the workflow of the departments for establishing priorities for tax abatements, for investments, for other efforts. And so I would like to come here and present the Fairview neighborhood plan. Maybe Mr. Wallen would like to present the downtown plan. There's the Mountain View targeted neighborhood plan. There are elements I would like to present and promote and discuss with the members so that collectively we can look at all of these plans and pull out of these plans action items that we all agree, and then move those into our assembly priorities efforts. Get our team, the planning department, everybody working on elements of these adopted plans, which I think the first step to that is raising awareness of everybody to what's in the plans. Because having heard recently about the Muldoon corridor section of the
East Anchorage plan. I had never heard of the Muldoon corridor section of East Anchorage plan. And it was like a light bulb moment. There's a real opportunity for us to collectively discuss these priorities or adopt it and then start working on very targeted elements within each. With each having a champion, because the champion would have brought it to this committee for discussion. And so, and promoted that plan and led. And so my hope is that the first one can be the East Anchorage plan. You're the chair, might as well use the opportunity. But before that, it's excellent to have the department review these sections, talk a little bit about the history, what exists, seeing the timeline that's there. It's like help and what's been happening and what hasn't been happening and how we can prioritize sections. And then I think maybe that's a chance to harmonize the efforts across various departments because these are already adopted.
Right.
And there are elements within each that are probably of interest to the members and to the departments. So that's my hope what this discussion does. And it's probably a conversation over many months, not a conversation over a handful of meetings. And so I hand that to the chair. I hope that that's what this committee does. And I'm sorry that I have to leave, but I do. So thank you, everybody.
Member Constance is really good at passing on the work to the next folks. Appreciate you and thank you for bringing this discussion. If there are any other members, it really was to open it up as Member Constance described it. I thank Brian for getting this information to us. And just as a follow-up, it was very difficult also to find where these all live in a unified place, in a uniform place. So our page would probably be a good clearinghouse for any of the links that may exist. So I know, for example, I found the East Anchorage District Plan on some old municipal link. And so that probably these things exist on different pages. But if we can have the access to at least whatever links folks can find, we can put it on our page, the CEDC page, and at least create a little clearinghouse for folks to find them. And one of the other interesting things to note is we went through a lot of conversations with a lot of tensions, and we will continue to do those, but with respect to housing and with respect to some of what seems like intergenerational challenges. And I don't necessarily mean that with respect to age, but I mean with respect to time and Anchorage, so new, older folk, and there had seemed to be some of that. What I continue to see where that, however people came to the conversation, there's just a lot of love for Anchorage and a lot of what I want Anchorage to be, whether it was to maintain the character that I invested in 20 years ago, or it was to be a part of the character from 20 years in the forward, right? And when we don't know necessarily of the work of the past, and then folks come to testify, say, hey, man, you're skipping over all of the work that we've done that had really great plans. I think we can do something about that by making sure we have more awareness of these plans. It honors the work that folks have done in the past, where there are some really great elements to a lot of these plans that I'm a drum major of as well. But there is also some real opportunities for moving things forward with all of the types of discussions so that we have just a better sense of growth and opportunity. And having said that, if you all look and just notice, the 10-year review dates for a lot of the plans that we do have either passed, they're now, or they're coming. And so that we have such a disconnect between awareness, tracking and measuring progress across plans, and then coming up to a 10-year review of them, knowing that we are dealing with real-time pressures. I just want us to get a better understanding and alignment as part of the challenge that Member Constance brought up. So yeah, Member Broughton?
Yeah, thanks. And I know this will be an ongoing conversation. I just want to offer some overall, at least where I would like to see maybe some guidelines for how we approach this. I agree with everything that was said. I think we do need to look back at these plans. I think we should be aware of the maintenance cost of creating new plans, right? So just to say, every time we say, yeah, that'd be great to do a neighborhood plan, there's two questions you should ask. What is it going to tell us that's different than the plans we already have? And then do we have a plan to update them? Because that's really the story of this, is that there's been intention over 30 years, right, to make all these plans, and then often they do sit on the shelf, and there's various reasons for that. And it is also the political wins, right? Every time there's a new administration or just different politics, right, then that influences these too. But I think just some general guidelines, just to remind folks, in the 2017 land use plan, there is language that says the most recent plan governs where they conflict. So there are some things in these plans that if you read them and they're from 2007, that they may or may not be the governing policy for that area, even though the neighborhood plan is supposed to be more specific. So, and specifically it says we have to maintain or expand housing capacity and economic capacity. So the idea is not that we're going back to a plan from 10 years prior and saying we're gonna put it back to there. It's how do we get that plan in alignment with our current land use plan? So I wanna say that generally. And then also I think, as I understand that the ask is not to look for what are all the updates in these plans to make, because that is basically a 5-year project, right, on itself. So it's really more what is already in the plans. Is it consistent with our current land use plan, or is it really a strategy or a policy that is going to achieve the goals in those plans? And then that is what we should be moving forward, right? And then in the context of the assumption, because, right, plans that were made 15 years ago had different assumptions, different economic conditions. So we also have to look at that too and say, just because it was written down in 2007, it does not mean that it applies in 2024 in the same way. And then lastly, I'll just say with plans, it's a hierarchy, right? The goals and the vision and the big picture is what you're saying, this is where we want to go. And the strategies are intended to drive toward that. So we should not look at plans and say, oh, this strategy says this, so we're just going to do that, right? You have to go back and really evaluate again in the current environment, is that strategy going to achieve the goals that we want? So I put all that on the table, just generally as we all look at these plans, and just a reminder that the context and the timing and the what they're trying to do matters as well. So I look forward to that conversation going forward.
Thank you, Member Brawley. Member Perez.
Yeah, so I don't know if there's someone from the administration, but this is such a strange setup. I don't know if someone from the administration that can answer this question, but I guess there's two parts, there's two pieces in my mind. One is the transition team and the priorities of the new administration and how those are gonna translate into plans, action steps. And so I'm curious if there's someone here that could speak to that, I mean, not me. But I'm curious about that and how the administration sees that, what that relationship is to all these existing plans that have been developed over time. Because to your point, Ms. Frawley, the value of the plan is that we all get on the same page, right? And that we may have different approaches to things, but we all agree we're gonna prioritize these three things in this time frame. That's the value of it, to get these bodies and energies on the same page. So I'm just curious, is that, and I don't know, I'll give it a shot. Okay, great. Because I know that's still new, and I realize that, but I think that it's very likely that it's going to be impossible to merge all of these things together. And that as a new administration, I would assume that there are priorities that come out of this administration, purely. So what are your thoughts about that?
Thank you, Member Perez-Perdita, and I'm going to follow up a little bit with Ms. Frawley's comment and this one. So when the planning department was putting this together, I actually tasked the planning department to do it a little bit deeper. And that is not only the ones that are in the comp plan, but the ones that are in, and I'll just give an example, in AMATS. In AMATS, there is no, you don't meet the 10-year margin. In AMATS, if you don't update your transportation plan, your TIP, you don't get any money. So the other thing I've asked them to do is identify not only all of the planning activities, but also the resources that they currently have. And the resources that if all of their positions were filled, what they would have. There's only, 2,080 hours in a year per person minus a couple days. So the task is how long would it take to update the utility board plan? We put it up to a consultant. What would it generally take to pull that? So what I'm asking the planning department to do, so we can share with the administration, so we can do two things: manage expectations and help set priorities. And that allows the administration to know what we actually have the capacity to do. More money doesn't solve vacant positions. I mean, Craig just started off. We've got 3 vacant planners in. So the ability to just put money into the problem isn't there if we can't attract the ability to actually pull it off. So I'm asking them to do that for us so that we can share with the administration, look, these are the things that are dated. These are the things that are dated that we think we need to do first. And this is what we have the ability to do first. Share that with them and tell them why. You guys are going to do that same thing based on the things that Mr. Constant mentioned. So, and just not even beyond planning. I look at planning different than current planning. So I've asked Mr. Whitfield to look at the code. I said, there are things in the code, and you guys have some interest in those things, the things that you are interested in. What are the things that we would change immediately? And do you have the ability to do it? I'm not even stopping planning, because I've asked development services to do the same thing in Title 23. So to your point, I've asked the departments to put that together so that we can share it with the administration team and say, look, these are the things that we should do. These are the things that we need to do. These are the things that we can do. Which ones do you want us to start with? That's us. They're going to help us kind of move forward, but it's also going to help us when we present our budgets to the administration in 25. So that is kind of my thought to answer your question. And I think it's the only way we can do it clearly. So that you guys, you have planning activities that you want to do, then we can manage that. Talk to the administration, Mr. Manager, Mrs. Manager, but that's stuff we're not going to do. We don't have the capacity to do both. So again, it's a fluid thing, but that is my task for all of the departments inside the community.
Yeah, I just want to, I really appreciate that. And I think that the one thing that I learned, many things I learned over the last few years, is how we can define things in a very different way. The word plan, what a plan is. We spent the last 2 years debating on what that is, what that isn't. I think there's an opportunity for us to get on the same page of what we mean by a plan. That it's a very real plan that we can all actually get behind and do something. So that's, I'm excited about that opportunity and for it to be something that is very real and doable. So thanks. Yeah.
Yeah, thank you, Lance. Keep it going. Member Bowman on Teams.
Hey, thank you. Can you hear me, Chair? Can you guys hear me?
Yes.
Oh, okay, great. So yeah, this is interesting. The spreadsheet doesn't capture all of the ongoing plans that are happening. Oh, there's kind of an echo. Well, I'll just keep going anyway. There's a lot of plans that are ongoing or that are called for in other plans. So for instance, the Muldoon Corridor plan is called for in the East Anchorage plan, but it has not been done. I'm sure that there are other plans that have been called for by these various plans that haven't been initiated. You know, we also have like the South Addition neighborhood plan is sort of in its final stages. The downtown streets engineering plan is ongoing. The right-of-way parking management snow removal plan, the long-range transportation policy plan. And so I guess just on the theme of managing expectations, I wonder if it's realistic when we make these plans to call for these 10-year review dates at all, because clearly, you know, they aren't being done. You know, we're looking at that column there. I'm wondering specifically on the Anchorage 2020 comp plan, is that still meant to imply that the 2040 land use plan was a 10-year review or not? That's a question for staff.
Sure, Chair Martinez, this is Brian Yale, Long Range Planning Manager. So 2040 was an update and a supplement to Anchorage 2020. It's more appropriate to call it an update and a supplement than categorize it as a 10-year targeted plan review, because that's a very specific thing under current Title 21. It's a bit of semantics there, but it's most appropriate classified as an update and a supplement.
Okay, thanks.
And just to the plans that are currently in development that are intended to be adopted elements of the comp plan are listed on the last page of the spreadsheet at the bottom. That does include the South Addition neighborhood plan, the Midtown district plan, and the long range transportation strategy. There are other projects that are underway by long range planning, but they're not intended to be adopted elements of the comp plan at this time.
Oh, okay, got it. Okay, that helps. Okay, that's clarifying. Thank you. I think two things would be helpful. I think number one, to Ms. Brawley's point, a project that that's maybe a standalone document or that goes back through some of these plans and amends them to point out any inconsistencies between the 2040 land use plan, the most recent plan governing, essentially. How do we, because if we look back at these plans, I think it can be confusing to read through them and say, oh, this is, yeah, I don't know. I think it'd just be good to have a document. As Chair Martinez says, these should all be in one place that's easily accessible for the public to read, but there should also be some sort of like cross-reference document to say, here are the things that were already updated and addressed as other plans are adopted. I know that's maybe a big project, but I think it'd be really important just so we can all be at sort of the same base level in our understanding of what is more recent. And then I think also what might be helpful is from the planning department in your current capacity and current staffing level, what are like the 4 or 5 biggest priorities when it comes to plans moving forward? Because I think that, the assembly, perhaps we could support you in those endeavors if we knew, if we had a sense of what your biggest priorities as projects move forward are. Thanks.
Thank you, Member Volan. Thank you, members. Thank you, staff, for this opening discussion. I remember Constance mentioned, we don't expect this to be just a couple of meetings. This is kind of a very extensive overview of lots of activity, lots of different projects probably coming through this, but Lance, I think you do get the picture. And I do appreciate that you nerded out a little bit and you went further than even the request, because fundamentally, and this is just to shout out our professional staff. You all are the closest ones to helping us understand what's actually happening. As policymakers, we deeply rely on your knowledge today, but also those other questions that you could see where we may not be able to see yet. So I appreciate that, Lance. Thank you for your work. On that note, let's go to another utility and their role in economic development, particularly around the idea of infrastructure costs and utility expansion. We have Member Salt asked us for having this discussion, and I would love for you to introduce it if you would.
Yep, absolutely.
Thank you.
Thank you. So I think when I first joined the assembly, sat down for introduction to AWU, appreciate that. And also I've heard it in this meeting as well, that one of the biggest barriers we have to housing development in the municipality is around infill development is the lack of water and waste services reaching all the parcels, not expanding services outside of outside the existing geography, but in the existing geography. We have a lot of parcels that are underserved. And an example would be you have 2 acre lots, 2 1 acre lots side by side, unserved. So right now you might build a single family level septic, where if you have provided water and sewer, you could then maybe put an collection on each parcel. So one of the things I'll look at is today we're just going to present the problem, make sure everyone has the same basis. But then 2, how can we incentivize to bring utilities to these parcels that are either undeveloped or ready for redevelopment, so we can get more units? And I know AMC 12.60 that Constance is working on, and maybe in our packet this week, touches on that. And Martinez and I have talked about this as well, is how we find the right mechanism to provide some sort of tax incentive or break to allow development of more units, because that's the cost that kills a lot of projects for development. And with that, turn it over to AWU.
Good morning. Yeah. Mark Schimsheimer, Engineering Director at AWU, and we have Jock Annandale online on Teams. He's got a presentation about 14, 15 slides long. It'll probably take 10 to 15 minutes to get through. I think it'll generate a conversation afterwards. So, Jock.
Yes, thank you, Mark, and thank you, Assemblymember Schulte. I just want to take a quick moment to recognize my preference would have been to give this presentation in person, but in the interest of not giving everybody in the room the same cold that I have, I'm presenting remote today. So I see what time we're at here, so I've got a few slides. I'm going to try to go through them here real quickly. I'm going to share my screen here, and please let me know if you can see it. I think everybody can see my screen right now, I believe, correct?
Yes. Yes.
All right, great. As you heard from the introduction, my name is Jacques Ando. I'm the Grants and Capital Assets Manager at AWU, and we're going to be talking a little bit about some of the challenges behind infrastructure development at AWU. Quick overview, we'll talk about the utility here, the background of it. We'll talk about kind of where we are today. We're going to then talk about the challenges and then also talk about some of the solutions that AWU's implemented in the recent past year. So AWU, as you guys all know, is an enterprise utility. We're one organization, but we're actually considered two separate utilities. It's the water utility and the sewer utility. This is reflective of the federal regulations, right, which is the Clean Water Act and the Drinking Water Act. So again, these are pretty close in nature of the type of work we do, but obviously different ends of the pipe, so to speak. Our primary regulators, and there are obviously more people that we deal with from a regulatory perspective, but the main ones that influence about how we do business is the Regulatory Commission of Alaska. This is an economic regulator of how we do business as far as what costs are allowable and that we can include in rates. And then we also have the Environmental Department, the Alaska Department of Environmental Conservation, which is the state agency that represents the EPA. Moving on to the current condition of infrastructure, there's a lot of nuance around this subject, around where are mains in the street, who are our customers, assessments, and what assessments have been levied. And so what we've done is looking at our customer base, I kind of wanted to summarize it into what I would call like our three groups of folks in Anchorage. There's people that are utility customers, which are people that have infrastructure, aka mains, in front of their property and services that they're using, and obviously they get a monthly bill. This is a pretty straightforward situation. We also have benefited properties, but that are not our customer. These are folks that are properties that have infrastructure in front of their property, but the services are not complete in some fashion. This could mean that it's either the service line from the property line to the building itself. It could be from the main to the building itself. But the short is that there's public infrastructure there, but there's not a service, and the particular property is not a customer at this point in time. And then finally, there is a not benefited property, which means that based on our tariff definitions, which again, that's an RCA defined term, there's no public main or service that a particular property could utilize. So understanding that concept, we kind of have this rough breakdown of the properties in the two service areas of the two utilities that we operate. You can see here that these numbers look generally the same, and I've rounded them to the nearest percent. But about 80% of the properties in our service area are customers. 6% have that service issue that we've talked about. It's not complete in one way or another. And then 14% are not benefited, meaning that there's a lack of infrastructure there. We have to look at these two service areas differently and do this analysis differently, because although most of our customers get both water and sewer from us in our service area, there are a fraction of the properties that are just sewer or just water. And so when you look at this example of like the Anchorage Bowl area, and you can see where the differences in our service area definition are. Here's, the green represents our customers that we talked about. Yellow represents the benefited but not a customer, and red represents the not served or not infrastructure. So you can see here we've got a rough checkerboard, and it's slightly different between water and sewer of service in our Anchorage Bowl area. I'd like to take a moment here to recognize that in reference back to the ACDA planning and effort regarding the abandoned and vacant properties. That data, this data, and other data through the municipality and our enterprise utilities could be used in the city data modeling concept that was brought up by Representative Martinez. And I think that, you know, what you can see here, if you look at the red and yellow, these are potential areas for investment. And then ultimately that's what we're going to be talking about next. Well, okay, if we were to invest in these areas, what are the challenges that we're going to face? And the first thing, and Assemblymember Solti mentioned this, is the costs of development. So what you see here is a rough diagram of offsite development costs. And I caution no one, please, nobody take a ruler, a scale to this, because obviously the picture to the right is just diagram. It's just a representation of the infrastructure. But when we're talking about infrastructure and serving properties, there are these 5 major, you know, layers, right, to infrastructure. There's the top, which is the road or the pedestrian, the traveled way. There's the shallower utilities, electric, gas, telecom. Then you've got drainage, storm drains, which oftentimes, and not just the pipes themselves, but ditches, curb and gutter, and the pipes that make sure our streets are drained and we're handling with rain events. And then we've got sewer and water. And what this diagram really represents is that most of the time, the sewer and water utilities are the deepest utilities. This means that the conversation regarding cost most often comes back to AWU, because these are the most expensive to put in. And in order to install these, you have to address all of the items above them, right? So drainage, shallow utilities, road, the traveled way, and all those things. And so because of that, in combination with our historical expansion programs, which up here we've got 2 historical, basically, expansion programs. You've got improvement districts, which are community voted, and the financial responsibilities on the community. And then you've got private developers as well, which is a market-driven thing, and the financial responsibility is on the developer. Now, understanding the physical costs of offsite development, understanding the expansion programs that we historically have, right? Improvement districts and private development, private system, or private developer processes. Those costs are as defined by our tariff and the RCA, the responsibility of the community. Today, because the cost of installing infrastructure to these properties that don't have services or don't have public mains, the costs have gone up for a number of reasons outside of the control of the utility, inflation, and you pick the topic. This results in a couple of issues, and we all know this, right? We saw an article earlier this week regarding housing and rent prices, right? We've got limited land for development. We've got which creates barriers that attract and start businesses, and fundamentally, when you look at that all together, this starts stagnating economic development in our community, right? If we don't have infrastructure and those kind of what I'd call first-class city services at all properties, which is the expectation, it's that final straw on the camel back that means, well, I'm not going to do this. I'm not going to build this development. I'm not going to build some. So it's it's a list of a couple things that can cause issues. In response to these challenges, AWU has done several things, and not just AWU. I think there are multiple departments throughout the municipality that have been, stakeholders in this effort to address these issues. But I can speak to AWU, and the 3 things that we've done is infrastructure coordinations agreements. This is added into our tariff roughly 2018. It's a flexible contract agreement, and it's similar to public-private partnerships, not exactly the same concept, but it allows for creative solutions that we work with other entities to bring infrastructure, bring service to our community. We've also gone after federal grant opportunities. This is primarily done through congressionally directed spending and competitive grant opportunities. These projects that we introduce have to be a mix of projects that when we propose the projects and infrastructure, they have to benefit current ratepayers or our community in some fashion, as well as, and also at the same time, will help open up some land or install new infrastructure to address some of these issues. And then finally, we have been working with and have an example of a newer solution, which is a hybrid private development, private system projects, which I'll talk about at the very end here. So looking at an infrastructure coordination agreement and what that means in real terms, we've got the Sandhill Reserve ICA, which was done back just before 2020. The agreement was finalized. This development was our first ICA. And just to note, this was the same presentation gave at the Housing Summit at the end of last winter, which I believe most of the assembly was there. And just a quick overview for this. This was a project where we had infrastructure in one location. We had an undeveloped lot, 10-acre lot on the north of that map there. And that undeveloped lot was one of these isolated properties that you saw earlier, the not benefited properties where it didn't have infrastructure to it. It was primed for development, and we needed to come up with a creative solution to get services there. So this ICA combined a private development with an AWU capital project to basically build infrastructure for existing residences that didn't have access to public water. And you could see that's the vertical red line there, and you could see where the existing properties and residences are. Many of these homes and properties had water quality issues with their private or community wells. So there was an incentive from a community perspective and an AWU perspective to increase our rate base as well to provide some public water access to these communities. And in addition to that, then that would allow the private development to happen, which is that portion in green up at the top of the image. With the ability to execute this ICA, we improved the health and safety of existing residences. We were able to increase housing supply. We increased the utility ratepayer base, and we also increased property values. So I look at this as a prime example of how we can look at our properties that either need some type of service, completion or public infrastructure installed, paired with a private developer or private equity that we can, and provide benefit to the community, the utility, and address some of the housing issues that we're seeing and economic development issues we're seeing. Moving on to that, here's a list of some of the federal opportunities that AWU has been fairly successful with, as well as some of the requests that are out there pending. I'm not going to go through this entire list, but I'll note that, if you look at some of these, for example, our fire protection water pipeline projects, these are resiliency projects that complete part of our system build out to increase fire flow and water quality for existing customers and residents. And in the same step, provide public infrastructure to properties and areas that didn't have that before. So it's these types of projects that we really tried to pursue from a federal side, which address multiple issues in our community. Moving on to the final solution here, I'd like to note some hybrid project work that we've done recently at the Carroll Creek development. And what this is fundamentally is creative design and optimized easement design that utilize, AWU private development, public main design and construction standards, as well considering, operations and maintenance access, but also utilizing private street design. And what this comes down to is we were able to develop an easement agreement that had both a utility and a setback easement that allowed for the same type of private development, public infrastructure access while maintaining private streets, which allowed for a higher density of housing development, minimize public liability, and maintained a high quality of service for residences in regard to water and sewer service. And so, no, that was a little bit of a lightning round there, but that's kind of the general overview of the topic. And I know we've only got about 16 minutes left, so I'll yield the floor and my time to Assemblymember Martinez.
Thank you, and thank you for the presentation. Any questions from the members? We'll open it now. And just to be clear, the meeting has 16 minutes left. This presentation does not have 16 minutes left. So we'll have about 10 or so max for today. Member Brawley and then Member Saul.
Yeah, a question about the, ICAs, whatever the Sandhill Reserve, the mechanism that you guys are using. Is that suitable for, say, development of one existing property? And I'm thinking of something like Cook Inlet Housing, where I think it was multiple parcels, but basically one relatively small area. Or is that more suited to building like an entire new subdivision where you've got several properties, multiple streets? And I understand you can also connect current residents, but I'm just wondering, because a lot of our issues are really single properties that don't have service.
ICAs in their essence are flexible. So it doesn't have to be green development. It can be redevelopment. It could be lots, and I'm not sure of the area you're talking about, but I know we've worked with Cook Inlet Housing, or they've come and chatted with us about an area on 56 in Cordova. There's a stretch of street that has public sewer, but not public water. We've got mains on either side. And so the discussion of, well, is there an interconnecting main that could benefit the existing ratepayer as well as then provide public infrastructure service to the properties, which I believe there's some vacant properties there as well, just a handful. But the short answer is that all ICAs can be flexible in that context. And it comes down to, I think, a topic that we talked about earlier, which is who pays for what to make sure that we've got the appropriate balance of cost causer, cost payer. That's a general mantra that we try to hold to pretty firmly at the utility, which really goes to, we just want to make sure our rate payers and our base are paying for the things that they should pay for and the developer is paying for the things they should pay for. The ICA just allows us a mechanism to make it more flexible and not as strict as, let's say, an improvement district or the private development as outlined in our tariff. So the short answer is yes, I would say, something we should consider.
And then I'll just very briefly say, this is more from a policy perspective. I think a question that we have to ask ourselves is, when we have limited resources, especially if we get federal funding, things like that, where should we put it? And to my mind, we should always be prioritizing putting, basically filling in these holes, the checkerboard in the core of the city before we talk about the edges. And that's just where I'm coming from, but that's also, I recognize we have a lot of different districts in the town, right? So, but that's my general policy approach to this. Thanks.
Thanks. Member Saul.
Yeah, thanks for the presentation, and just kind of to highlight the problem. You go back to the Sand Hill developments. On that map, the streets to the right remain unserved. So we solved part of the problem, created some opportunity, and I'm sure some of those people on the existing homes connected. I don't know that for sure, but I'm sure some did. But the streets, correct me if I'm wrong, but the streets to the right still don't have service.
We do have a federal grant that has been appropriated to us to provide service to a certain extent to those streets. But yes, they are not currently served.
And when we provide service, what do you typically see? Do you typically see single family or multi-family homes?
Well, what you see in that subdivision, that's all single family homes. So they're on well and septic. The wells are contaminated with arsenic, their septic is failing, they're small lots, replacement is difficult. Grant monies and ICAs are a way to bring service to those individual communities. We continue to push that.
Excellent. Any other members with questions today? I appreciate the presentation, and there was just to highlight, there was the GIS map. Is that a public document?
Yes.
All right. So we have a GIS map. We'll make sure that we also make it available to the public through our page too, so we'll get it. And it's it has all of the properties across Anchorage, and it shows where the hookups, who have the hookups, water only, sewer only. And my hope is that this really feeds into the next conversation about expanding tax abatement reinvestment focus areas, but primarily with overlay data that shows us where we need to be, right? And so if we can really have a good understanding of where the greatest bang for the buck's going to be with respect to the priorities of the municipality, the needs and the urgency, but also the economic questions about just where we make those investments. And I tend to agree with Member Brawley, not tend to, I wholeheartedly agree with Member Brawley with respect to start with where you are with what you have and a lot of the corridors of opportunity with respect to zoning and other things that speak to the future of growth. There's still some of these infrastructure gaps right in those cores. So before we go expanding even further to the question of who pays for what, those are really seems like some tremendous opportunities to have overlaying information, show us where the targeted investments are going to meet the biggest bang for the buck. And I'm also appreciative of staff meeting with some of the affordable housing developers and other folks in town, because those relationships matter a lot. And in our conversation of the next expanding the tax, abatement and reinvestment focus areas, later today in our rules committee, this will be also a discussion for our assembly. There are many of us who are peeking at different areas of some of the existing tax abatement strategies and how we can extend them out. This has been a legislative priority of this committee since I've even became a member of this committee with respect to reinvestment focus areas. And I would just love if anyone can give a technical definition that the city uses for what a reinvestment focus area is. It seems like there are, different designations of different opportunity areas and zones, but in the bigger sense, what a reinvestment focus area is, how we understand it to be, and then I'm really interested in how we measure any of it, how we measure success about the reinvestment strategies that we have in the first place. So if there are anyone who, from the administration or from staff, who can at least open up with a definition of the reinvestment focus area that we're utilizing, that would be just helpful for me with the discussion. I think Mr. Wilbur is the one.
I don't want to misquote the words of the definition, so let me send them to you because we do get a lot of applications for these for sizes or expansions or changes. So let me find it and I'll send it to the committee.
Okay, so
when's your rules committee?
Today at, was it 1 p.m.? 1 p.m. today?
Okay, I'll attempt to get it to you before your committee.
Excellent, that'd be helpful. And we're just at a high level without the definition, the technical definition. Is it the case, and I just think I heard you say that there are many reinvestment,
yes,
several at least, and there are different types?
Yes.
Okay.
We have some of them that are focused on a block. We have some of them that are focused on the building in a block. We have some of them that are focused on an entire area. So
the scale could
it can change, and it depends on the request.
Okay. Now, Mr. Please introduce yourself.
Thank you, Mr. Martinez. Dave Whitfield, Planning Department. As Lance mentioned, there are a number of areas identified in the 2020 plan as being appropriate for reinvestment focus areas. It was a team of members of the Planning Department, members of legal staff that actually wrote this ordinance for reinvestment focus areas that provide the framework and the approval mechanism for formally these reinvestment focus areas that will ultimately provide the flexibility to establish incentives for that development. We haven't at this point in time ever gone through the formal process of a reinvestment area, the approval process, but we see this as an opportunity.
Okay, just to be clear, and I appreciate that. So an ordinance that you described doesn't exist?
The ordinance exists.
Okay.
The formalization of a reinvestment focus area. So the 2040 plan identifies appropriate areas, but the actual formalizing of that area as a reinvestment focus area has not been done. Because the actual ordinance, what it does is establishes flexibility. It establishes potentially some financial incentive to development. But we've not had a developer or group of developers come in and exercise the use of that ordinance as we get.
Okay. Thank you for that. We look forward to that information coming to us with respect to the definitions. And then also, if it exists, what you describe are like, the existing ones that are out there. I know about those as well. And then how it relates to the 2040 land use. I think that would be interesting.
Yeah. Sure. So, Chair Martinez, Brian Yelligan. Look on the map 3-1, the actions map for Baker Street ordinance. It shows that the areas are intentionally blurry and fuzzy because their boundaries are not defined explicitly for where appropriate areas for reinvestment focus area are. So we pointed those areas out as we should focus efforts here. But as Dave pointed out, we haven't had developers, urban developers, property owners come and actually apply for a formal designation, dedication to make that into investment.
All right. I see Mr. Gates, do you have a comment? Remember, Raleigh?
Oh, I'm sorry. I was just going to mention that the reinvestment focus areas is very new. The ordinance, the enacted process that Mr. Whitfield talked about, say in 2022-62 give forward that to the committee members. I think that passing an ordinance and amending code, this amendment code, the new section on reinvestment focus areas 2103-116. I think though what we're seeing is the lack of resources or the shortage of resources and staff shortages and implementation of this new process sort of it's not probably that's what I would say. And I think those are the challenges we face when we have some new initiative that's passed by ordinance, but then actually getting it in place and all the things working to make it effective and implemented can be a challenge.
Thank you, Mr. Gates. Member Raleigh?
Yeah, building on that idea of implementation, I think the other thing, and I'll bring this up later, so, but I'm saying it because there's a lot of other folks in the room that won't be in the rules committee. The question we always have to ask is what problem are we trying to solve with these incentives, right? And so how targeted do we get? These are just general questions to think about, but I think it's important for the RFAs. Do we really geographically target? Do we target a type of housing? And then what requirements do we put on it? Because I think we in other cities have this issue where we put some requirements in the existing incentives that we have, and then no one can use them because they're not economically feasible. So I think, again, we have to talk about economic feasibility, and then balancing what are we getting, like what are we trying to get as a public benefit by giving away this tax money temporarily, but also, again, making sure that they actually get used. And then in general, it's also important to think about, there's tax exemption, which you could get forever, like a residential tax exemption, you have it as long as you live in that residence. But economic development tax incentives, the idea is that eventually the building goes back on the tax rolls fully because you're trying to increase your tax base. So I also just want to say that generally, anything that we're doing should be time limited, and all these are, but the goal is not to give a forever tax break. The goal is to get somebody to build a building that will eventually have its full value on the tax rolls. And so just to say and we'll have that conversation about all these incentives, but I just want to put that on the table as like and I'm thinking what types of housing are not feasible to build that we want to incentivize. So I'm still kind of mulling over all this, but that's just a thing to think about.
I just want to extend appreciation to staff for stepping up to these questions that we have and for helping us have better understanding of it. I think as a suite of all of the information we talked about today, if we were able to land a lot of these pieces, we would learn a lot more about how to target more strategically our investments more effectively. So at that note, are there any members of the public here who wish to introduce or be heard or to say? And just to note also, if you are a member of the public and want to communicate to us, just send us an email as well, and we'll make sure that every member of the committee has the information or the message that you want them to receive. We'll adjourn. 30 seconds, I'm waiting. I'm going to do it officially. Thank you, everybody. We'll call this meeting adjourned.